It was just another ordinary evening in Los Angeles, the kind where the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets. Keanu Reeves, dressed simply in a jacket and jeans, stepped out of a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street. Despite the fame that had followed him for years, Keanu always preferred this calm, anonymous existence, sipping coffee alone, with no one around to crowd him. He liked it this way, unnoticed, free to go about his day like any other person. On this evening, however, things were about to change. Keanu had just taken a few steps outside when he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. A man, who looked to be in his mid-40s with unkempt hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks, was stumbling along the sidewalk. He looked disoriented, as if the world was spinning around him. Keanu stopped, his attention now fully on the stranger. Something was wrong. Before Keanu could take another step, the man collapsed right in front of him, hitting the pavement with a thud. It happened so quickly without any warning that Keanu was almost frozen for a moment. For a brief second he wondered if it was some kind of joke. But when he saw the man's pale face and the way his body lay limp on the ground, Keanu's instincts kicked in. Without a second thought, he rushed over to the man's side. He knelt down quickly, checking the man's breathing. The street was busy, people walking by, glancing over, but doing nothing. Some of them pulled out their phones, quietly recording what was happening, expecting maybe to catch a glimpse of the celebrity. But Keanu wasn't thinking about that. He was focused on the man lying motionless on the ground. "Hey, can you hear me?" Keanu said, his voice gentle but urgent. The man didn't respond, his eyes closed, his body still. Keanu pressed his fingers to the man's neck, feeling for a pulse. It was weak, but there. Still, the situation felt urgent. He looked up, scanning the street. "Someone call 911, he shouted. A couple of people nearby froze, unsure of what to do. But Keanu didn't wait. He took out his phone and dialed the emergency number himself. "Hi, there's a man who collapsed on the sidewalk. He's not responding and he's really weak. Please hurry." As he spoke to the operator, his attention remained fixed on the man. He adjusted the man's position slightly, trying to make sure he was lying comfortably and his airways were clear. For a moment, it felt as if the whole world had paused. People were still standing around, some staring, others whispering to each other. But Keanu was lost in his own world, focused entirely on the man in front of him. He wasn't looking for recognition. He wasn't worried about the cameras that were now flashing. It was as though nothing existed outside this moment. As Keanu spoke to the operator, his mind raced with thoughts of how to help. His phone call ended and he quickly moved to action again. Reaching out to a nearby food vendor, Keanu asked for water and some snacks. The kind of food you could grab quickly when you were in a rush. The vendor, a middle-aged woman, gave him a puzzled look at first, but then she saw his expression and nodded. She didn't ask for money. Instead, she handed him a bottle of water and a small sandwich. Watching him hurry back to the collapsed man, Keanu gently lifted the man's head, placing a small cushion under it and offering him the water. The man stirred slightly but still didn't speak, his breathing shallow and uneven. Keanu kept his voice calm, trying to reassure the man without overwhelming him. "Stay with me. Help is on the way," he murmured. People were still filming, but Keanu seemed completely unaware. His only concern was for this stranger who had fallen at his feet, someone who needed help, not attention. As the minutes ticked by, Keanu noticed a faint movement in the man's chest. His breathing seemed to stabilize a bit, and Keanu felt a small surge of relief. But even with help on the way, it wasn't enough for Keanu to simply wait. He had no idea who this person was or what had led him to collapse in front of him. But Keanu could feel a deep empathy for this man. He had seen hardship in his life too, though perhaps in a different way. It was impossible not to wonder how this stranger ended up on the streets. What had led him to this moment? With the ambulance still a few minutes away, Keanu remained kneeling beside the man, holding the water to his lips, offering him reassurance as if they were old friends. His demeanor was kind but calm, the kind of person you'd expect to see comforting someone who needed it most. There was no rush in his actions, no panic, only steady resolve to ensure this man was taken care of until professionals arrived. As the sirens of the ambulance grew louder in the distance, the crowd around them began to disperse. The attention, for the most part, had been brief. Most people moved on, some still holding their phones out, capturing the scene, perhaps unsure of whether to post or not. It was only a few minutes later that the paramedics arrived, rushing over with their medical bags and equipment. But even then, Keanu didn't leave the man's side. He stayed close, watching the paramedics work. They checked the man's vitals and began to prepare him for transport. Keanu spoke with them briefly, giving them any information he could, before stepping back to let the professionals take over. And just like that, as the paramedics wheeled the man away, Keanu stood up, brushing off his jacket and looking around for a moment. The whole event had unfolded so quickly, and now it felt as though it was all over. The bustling street, once filled with people watching, had returned to normal. People resumed their routines, some even talking about what had happened, though many of them still didn't quite understand why Keanu Reeves had been so involved. As for Keanu, he didn't linger. He didn't need the attention. He had done what he felt was right. No one needed to thank him. He simply took a deep breath, adjusted his jacket, and continued on with his day, leaving the scene behind him as quietly as he had entered it. For him, the world was full of moments like this, moments when someone needed help and you did what you could no matter who you were. He didn't need to make a big deal of it. He simply wanted to do the right thing. Keanu stood in silence for a moment after the paramedics wheeled the man into the ambulance. The chaotic hum of the street returned around him, as if everything had gone back to normal. The people who had been watching from the sidelines were now busy with their own lives. Some continued to scroll on their phones, others chatted to each other, and a few simply walked away. But none of them knew what had just happened, the brief, fleeting moment when Keanu Reeves had acted not as a celebrity, but as a human being, caring for someone in need. Keanu's mind was still with the man in the ambulance. He didn't know who he was, didn't know what had led him to this moment. But he couldn't shake the feeling of connection, that fleeting moment of kindness, of compassion, when the world seemed to slow down and everything else faded away. He turned slowly, as if weighing his next move, but it wasn't a complicated decision. He didn't need recognition for what had happened. He didn't need anyone to say thank you. He just needed to know that the man would be all right. Without another glance back, Keanu slipped his phone into his pocket and walked away from the scene. The cool evening air wrapped around him, a gentle reminder that life would continue moving forward. He could hear the faint sound of the ambulance as it sped off down the street, the sirens gradually fading into the distance. There was a small part of him that hoped the man in the back of that ambulance would wake up and get the help he needed. It was a quiet, almost invisible act of kindness. There were no grand gestures, no speeches. Keanu had simply done what felt right. He didn't make a show of it, didn't seek applause. The world would never know that a celebrity had stepped in to help, and Keanu was perfectly okay with that. For him, the act of kindness had been enough. Later that evening, Keanu sat in his car, the streets of LA bustling around him. He had already forgotten about the people who had been filming, the ones who had watched the scene unfold. He didn't care about them. His thoughts were still with the man he'd helped. Where was he now? What happened to him after the ambulance arrived? Was he going to be okay? Keanu's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from his assistant, asking if he was free the next day for a press interview. Keanu sighed and rubbed his eyes. The whole idea of interviews and media attention had always felt strange to him. He didn't mind talking about his work, but he preferred to keep things simple, quiet. But tonight it felt different. His mind kept drifting back to the man who had collapsed on the sidewalk, to the person he had been in that moment, vulnerable and in need of help. The next morning, Keanu received a call from the hospital. He picked up without hesitation. "Hello, Mr. Reeves." A nurse's voice came through the line. "I'm calling to inform you that the man you helped yesterday has regained consciousness. His vitals are stable and he's resting now. The doctors say he'll be okay." A wave of relief washed over Keanu. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking in the news. "Thank you for letting me know," Keanu said quietly. "I'm glad to hear that," the nurse continued. "I just wanted to pass along a message. The man, he's asking for you. He keeps saying that you helped him. He wants to thank you." Keanu's heart softened. He wasn't expecting that. He had only done what he thought was right. But hearing that the man wanted to thank him, it hit him in a way he hadn't anticipated. I'm not sure I can make it to the hospital right now," Keanu said, his voice hesitant. "But please tell him I'm happy he's okay. That's all I care about." The nurse promised to pass along the message, and Keanu ended the call. As he sat there in his quiet apartment, his thoughts turned inward. He wondered about the man's life. What had brought him to that street corner? What had led him to that point of collapse? Keanu knew that his actions had been a simple thing, but perhaps it was moments like these that mattered most. A small gesture of kindness could ripple through the world in ways no one would ever truly understand. Keanu spent the rest of the day in a state of quiet reflection. The world outside moved with its usual rush, cars honking, people walking past, news blaring on TV. But for Keanu, it felt like everything had slowed down. His mind was no longer on the upcoming press interviews or movie scripts. Instead, it was with that stranger, a man who had briefly crossed his path and changed something inside him. In the evening, after a long day, Keanu decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. The air had cooled and the streets were quieter now, the neon lights of the city offering a faint glow in the distance. It was during this walk that something unexpected happened. As he turned the corner, he saw a figure sitting on a bench near a park. It was the man from the street. Keanu's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to see him here, not like this. The man was sitting with his head down, his clothes still rough, but there was a different energy about him now. He was sitting up straighter, his hands no longer trembling. Keanu's first instinct was to approach him to see how he was doing. But he hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say or do. The man looked up just as Keanu took a step toward him. Their eyes met. The man's face softened, and for a moment the two of them simply stood there wordlessly acknowledging each other. "Hey," Keanu said finally, his voice soft. "How are you feeling?" The man looked at him, confusion flickering across his face for just a moment before recognition settled in. "You," he said, his voice raspy. "You're the one who helped me." Keanu nodded. "Yeah, I just wanted to make sure you were okay." The man's eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life." Keanu smiled gently, shaking his head. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad you're all right." There was an awkward silence between them. The man looked down at his hands, then back up at Keanu. I was lost, you know? I had nothing. I didn't think anyone cared anymore." Keanu could see the pain in the man's eyes. He could feel the weight of his words, the years of struggle that had led him to this moment. Keanu didn't say anything for a moment, just listened. Sometimes that's all you really needed to do. "You've got more people than you realize who care," Keanu said softly, his voice carrying a weight of understanding. "It's just that sometimes people get lost in the world." The man nodded slowly, a tear slipping down his cheek. Keanu didn't try to wipe it away, didn't make a big gesture. He simply sat next to the man on the bench and shared the silence. Two people who had briefly crossed paths, but in doing so, had both been reminded of what it meant to be human. And for Keanu, that was enough. Keanu left the bench slowly, with no rush in his step. The man, still sitting there with his eyes now filled with something more than just the weight of hardship, watched him go. Keanu had always believed in letting people have their space, especially when they were going through something difficult. The silence between them had been heavy yet healing. Sometimes silence spoke louder than words could. As Keanu walked away from the park, his thoughts lingered on the encounter. He'd seen that look in the man's eyes before, a look of someone who had been abandoned by life in some way, someone who had lost hope, and in some strange way, found it again. Keanu understood it perhaps more than most people realized. Life wasn't always kind. Everyone at some point felt like they had been kicked down by the world, and it was easy to think there was no way back up. But that wasn't the case. It never was. Keanu couldn't stop thinking about what the man had said. "I didn't think anyone cared anymore." He understood the feeling. Keanu had been there too, in a different way. He had lost loved ones, had faced moments where it felt like there was no end to the pain, but somehow life had found a way to pull him through. It wasn't fame or fortune that had saved him. It was the kindness of others, the simple acts that reminded him that he was still part of something larger, something good. The next few days were quiet for Keanu. He spent time doing the usual, working on a project, keeping his routine simple, avoiding the spotlight. But as much as he tried to focus on his work, the man from the park kept creeping into his mind. Keanu knew it was strange. He barely knew the man, but something about him lingered. Maybe it was the connection they'd made even in such a brief encounter. There were moments when Keanu wondered what he could do to help further. Maybe he could offer the man a job or find a way to get him back on his feet. Keanu had been fortunate in many ways, and he knew that not everyone had the same opportunities. He wanted to reach out, to help in a way that went beyond that one moment of kindness. But how? What was the right thing to do? One afternoon, after thinking about it for days, Keanu found himself walking back toward the park. It wasn't a planned visit. He just needed to check on the man. He hadn't seen him in days, and though he knew it wasn't his responsibility, something about the situation felt unfinished. As he approached the bench, Keanu's eyes scanned the area. He didn't see the man at first. For a moment he felt a pang of worry. What if something had happened? What if the man had disappeared again, back to wherever he had come from? Keanu's heart sank at the thought. But just as he was about to turn and leave, he spotted a figure sitting at the far end of the park, near the trees. The man from the other day was there, but this time something was different. He looked a bit cleaner, his clothes a little less worn, his posture a little more upright. He wasn't the same broken man Keanu had seen collapse on the sidewalk. He was sitting there reading a book, a slight smile on his face. It was a change Keanu noticed immediately. The man looked up, catching Keanu's gaze. At first there was a flicker of recognition, then a quiet surprise. He stood up slowly, almost awkwardly, as if unsure whether to approach. "Hey," Keanu said, offering a small wave. The man smiled shyly. "Hey, you came back." Keanu chuckled, the tension easing in his chest. "I wanted to check on you. You're looking better." The man nodded, then hesitated. I'm doing okay, actually. I've been staying at a shelter for a few days now. They helped me get cleaned up and, well, I don't know how to explain it, but I feel a little different, a little more myself." Keanu smiled, feeling a sense of relief. "That's good. I'm glad to hear that." They stood there for a moment, not needing to say much. Just the quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted, something small but important. Keanu had done his part in that moment when he had helped, but the real change had come from the man himself, from his own willingness to take the next step. "I'm still looking for work," the man said, breaking the silence. "I've been applying to some places, but I don't know how much luck I'll have. It's been tough." Keanu could see the uncertainty in the man's eyes, the old worries creeping back into his thoughts. But Keanu had learned something over the years. Sometimes all it took was one person to believe in you when you couldn't believe in yourself. And that's what he wanted to offer now, not just kindness, but hope. "I know how tough things can be," Keanu said softly, "but I believe you'll get there. Keep pushing. And if you ever need a hand, let me know. I might be able to help out in some way." The man's eyes widened, his expression a mixture of surprise and gratitude. You mean that?" Keanu nodded. "Of course. Sometimes it's just about giving someone a chance. Everyone deserves that." They stood there in the park, the wind rustling through the trees as the man processed what Keanu had said. It wasn't about making grand promises, and Keanu didn't intend to change the man's life overnight. But sometimes the smallest bit of encouragement could make all the difference. And if Keanu could be that voice for someone, he was willing to try. "You don't know how much this means to me," the man said after a long pause, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been on my own for so long, I didn't think anyone cared anymore." Keanu smiled, feeling the weight of his words. "You're never really alone. Sometimes it just takes a little time to see the people around you who are willing to help. You're not invisible." The man stood there for a moment, clearly trying to hold back tears. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Keanu clapped him gently on the shoulder. "You're welcome. Just keep going. It gets better." The two of them shared a final moment of silence before Keanu turned to leave. But this time the man didn't stay behind. As Keanu walked away, he turned back and saw the man standing tall, looking more confident than he had when they first met. There was something about his posture now, something that spoke of a new resolve. Keanu didn't look back again. He knew that the man would be okay. He had taken the first step, and sometimes that was the hardest part of all. And for Keanu, that was enough. He had done what he could to show that kindness could still be found in the most unexpected places. Days passed, and the world continued to turn. For Keanu, the quiet moments of life were always the most peaceful. He kept himself busy with his usual work, scripts to read, meetings to attend, projects to consider. But in the back of his mind, the man he had helped stayed with him. It wasn't as if Keanu couldn't forget. It was just that he didn't want to. He wasn't the type to let people slip away when they needed a hand. In the days after their meeting, Keanu hadn't seen the man again, but he'd heard little snippets here and there. Keanu liked to keep to himself, but that didn't mean he didn't pay attention. He'd learned that people often left behind small traces of their lives, even if they didn't intend to. Sometimes those traces were stories, things that lingered long after the event was over. One afternoon, while Keanu was driving across the city for a meeting, he passed by the park where he had seen the man last. It was one of those familiar moments when you didn't expect to see anything out of the ordinary, but then without warning you did. There, sitting on the same bench, was the man. This time he wasn't reading a book or looking down. He was talking to someone, laughing even. Keanu slowed his car, glancing over with interest. The man appeared different, more confident somehow. He didn't look like someone who had just been barely holding on a few weeks ago. He looked like someone who had found their feet again. Keanu didn't stop. He couldn't. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't the kind of satisfaction you get from an accomplishment. It was something quieter, deeper, something that told him his small act of kindness had made a difference. The next day, Keanu received an unexpected phone call. It was from a local outreach program that helped people get back on their feet after hard times. They had received a donation from a generous stranger and wanted to know if Keanu might be interested in hearing more about it. The organization had recently partnered with a few businesses to create job opportunities for people who had fallen on hard times. Keanu didn't need to be told much more. He already knew. "Is this the program that works with people from the streets?" Keanu asked, his voice steady. "Yes, that's right. We help people who are homeless or in difficult situations. A man recently came to us, someone you might know. He mentioned you, said you'd helped him some time ago." The voice on the other end paused for a moment. "He's doing better now. He's been staying at one of the shelters and he's started applying for jobs. He's come a long way." Keanu didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. All that mattered was that the man he had helped was making progress. The small, simple gesture that had seemed insignificant at the time was having ripple effects. Keanu felt a quiet pride in that. "I'd like to help," Keanu said, his voice firm. "I'm interested in offering support. Let me know what I can do." The conversation continued, but Keanu's mind was already elsewhere. He knew what he had to do next. A week later, Keanu arranged a meeting with the man. He found himself back at the park, the same bench where they had shared a quiet moment together. The world around them was busy, but in that small corner of the city it felt still, as though the universe had paused just for this moment. When the man arrived, Keanu could see that he had changed even more. His clothes were cleaner, his face brighter. He looked different, not just on the outside but in the way he carried himself. There was a quiet confidence there now, one that hadn't been present before. "Hey!" Keanu greeted him with a smile. The man returned the smile, his eyes lighting up. "Hey, you're back," Keanu nodded. "I wanted to see how you were doing." "I'm doing better," the man said, his voice steady. "I've been looking for work, staying at the shelter. They've been helping me a lot." "That's great to hear," Keanu replied. "I've been talking with a local program. They help people like you get back on their feet. I wanted to know if you'd be interested in a job opportunity. It's not much, but it could be a start." The man looked at Keanu, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "You're offering me a job?" Keanu smiled gently. "Not just me. The program. They've partnered with a few local businesses to help people find work. I think you'd be a great fit." For a moment, the man was silent, as though he couldn't quite believe what Keanu was saying. His eyes darted around as if searching for something to anchor him in reality. "I don't know if I'm ready," the man said quietly, his voice faltering for just a moment. "I don't know if I can do it." Keanu could see the doubt in the man's eyes, the hesitation. It wasn't surprising. The man had been through so much, and when you've been down for so long, it can be hard to believe you can stand up again. "Hey," Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. "You're not alone in this. You've already made it this far. Don't let fear stop you now." The man looked at him, uncertainty still clouding his gaze, but there was something else there now. A small spark. A flicker of hope buried deep inside but growing. "I don't know," he said again, but this time it was softer, more thoughtful. "Think about it," Keanu encouraged. "You don't have to make a decision right away. But remember, taking the first step is the hardest part. After that, it gets easier. The man took a deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling as he processed Keanu's words. It was clear that he was still grappling with the weight of his past, with the fear of failing, of falling again. But there was a shift happening. He was starting to see that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for him to change. "I'll think about it," the man finally said. "I will." Keanu nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "That's all I'm asking. Just think about it. And when you're ready, you know where to find me." They sat in silence for a while, watching the world go by, the sounds of the park and the city blending together. Keanu could tell the man was lost in his thoughts, thinking about the future. He didn't push. He knew that the journey wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. Eventually, Keanu stood up, stretching his legs. "I'll leave you to it," he said, smiling one last time. "Take care of yourself." The man nodded, still looking at the ground. But as Keanu began to walk away, he called out softly, "Thank you, really." Keanu turned and looked back. "You're welcome. Just remember, you're never alone." As Keanu walked away from the park, he couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction, not from anything he had done, but from the knowledge that this man was beginning to see that he was worth something, that he had the ability to stand up, to fight for a better life. And in a world that often felt disconnected, where people sometimes didn't see each other, this was a small victory. The ripple effect of one act of kindness had created something beautiful. And that, Keanu realized, was all that mattered. Weeks passed, and the days grew longer as Keanu's life moved along with the usual rhythm of his work and personal time. But something in him had changed since that day in the park. The man, the one he had helped, kept coming back to his thoughts. Keanu had tried to go about his life without dwelling on it too much, but there was an undeniable connection now. He'd seen the spark of possibility in the man's eyes, and that spark had stayed with him. He didn't hear from the man right away, but that wasn't a surprise. Keanu knew that things like this took time. The man had so much to overcome. Keanu had been there himself in his own way many times before. It wasn't the big dramatic moments that made the difference in life. It was the quiet steps, the small wins that came one after another. And it was always a matter of whether you had someone to help you along the way. One afternoon, while Keanu was at a small cafe, sipping his coffee and reading through a script, he received a text. It was short, simple, and yet it carried so much weight. The message read, "I did it. I got the job." Keanu felt a warmth spread through his chest, a sense of pride that he hadn't expected. He had always known that the man had potential, but to hear it in his own words, "I did it," felt like a victory. Not just for the man, but for both of them. Keanu didn't hesitate. He quickly typed back, "I knew you could. Proud of you." He set his phone down and returned to his script, but his mind was racing. There was no denying it. This wasn't just about a job. It was about reclaiming his life. It was about breaking free from the chains of hopelessness and stepping into a new future. The man had taken that first step, and now he was finding his way. A few days later, Keanu met with the man again. This time, they met in a small diner just a few blocks from the park where they had first talked. Keanu arrived early, a habit he had long embraced. He liked being the first to arrive. It gave him a moment to reflect, to prepare for whatever conversation would come next. When the man walked in, Keanu could see the difference right away. He wasn't slouched or withdrawn like he had been before. He walked into the diner with his head held high, shoulders squared. He didn't look like someone who had been lost. He looked like someone who was finally starting to find himself. "Hey," Keanu greeted him with a smile. The man grinned back, his face lighting up with a confidence Keanu hadn't seen before. "Hey, thanks for meeting me. I've been meaning to talk to you." Keanu motioned for him to sit. "Of course. How's everything going?" The man sat down and took a deep breath. "It's going well," he said, his voice steady. "I've been working at a local cafe for a couple of weeks now. It's not much, but it feels like I'm moving forward, you know?" Keanu nodded. "I know exactly what you mean. It's not about how big the step is. It's just about taking it." The man leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the table. "You were right," he said quietly. "I was scared. I didn't think I could do it. But I just decided to try. And it feels different now. Like I don't know, alive again." Keanu smiled softly. "That's all I wanted to hear." For a moment there was a quiet pause between them. Keanu could see the man still trying to process everything, still uncertain about how to move forward, but there was no doubt in his eyes. He had taken the first step and now he was ready to keep walking. "You've come a long way," Keanu said gently, "and it's just the beginning." The man nodded, but there was something more there now, something that spoke of hope, not fear. "I don't know if I would have gotten here without you," he said quietly. Keanu leaned back in his chair, not wanting to make this moment too heavy. "You did the work. You made the choice. I just helped you see it." The man smiled, a quiet smile that spoke volumes. He was grateful, but there was no need for grand gestures. The simple fact that he was standing up, moving forward, was enough. The conversation turned to lighter things: work, life, how the city always seemed to be in a hurry. They both found themselves laughing at the small things, the everyday absurdities that made life a little less serious. And for the first time in a long time, the man looked like he was genuinely enjoying himself. As they parted ways that day, Keanu couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't just about helping someone get a job, it was about showing them that they weren't invisible, that they had the strength within themselves to change their circumstances. And now he could see it. The man was different, stronger. He was on his way to something new, something better. The next few weeks flew by in a blur. Keanu heard from the man every now and then, little updates here and there about how things were going. He had started picking up more hours at the cafe, and he was beginning to save up money. It wasn't easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. One evening, Keanu received another message. It wasn't long, but it said everything Keanu needed to hear. "I'm moving into my own place. I can't thank you enough. You changed everything." Keanu stared at the message for a moment, letting it sink in. He didn't reply right away. He didn't need to. He just sat there, grateful for this small moment, for the realization that in some way he had played a part in helping this person find his way. The next time they met, it was at the man's new apartment. It was small, nothing fancy, but it was his. Keanu stepped inside and looked around, taking in the simple yet meaningful space. There were a few pieces of furniture, some personal touches, but more than that, there was a sense of ownership, of pride. "This is amazing," Keanu said, his voice full of warmth. The man smiled, looking around at his new home. "Yeah, it's not much, but it's mine. I never thought I'd be here, but I am, and I'm going to keep going." Keanu nodded. "You're doing great." As they stood there talking about life and what the future might hold, Keanu realized something. It wasn't just about the job or the apartment or even the money. It was about the shift in perspective, the way the man had come to understand that his life was his own to shape. Keanu had simply given him a nudge in the right direction, but it was the man's courage, his resilience, that had carried him this far. Keanu's heart swelled with pride, not for any recognition, but for knowing that he had been part of something real, something lasting. It wasn't the grand gestures that mattered. It was the quiet, everyday actions that made the difference. And in this small corner of the world, Keanu had seen how one act of kindness, one moment of reaching out, could create ripples that touched lives in ways that no one could ever fully measure. "Keep going," Keanu said as he prepared to leave. "You've got this." The man stood at the door, his smile wide and genuine. "I will." "Thank you." Keanu turned and walked out of the apartment, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle over him. It wasn't about fame or accolades. It wasn't even about being noticed. It was about human connection. And that, Keanu knew, was the most important thing.